Kakadosh Boker Or Masechet Batra Daf Kafei Amud Aleph 25a1. We are starting by the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, "Marchikim et nevelot et hakvarot et bursikim min ha'ir 50 amah." You have to come, and you're going to the distance. Whether we're talking about the nevelot or the kvarot, any types of tombstones or nevelot, and the bursiki. Bursiki is where they make the tannery, right, from the city for 50 amot. Why? Because since it has a bad smell, it's going to ruin, right, the entire concept of the city. And also, you're only going to make it to the east of the city, right? Why? Because he says, because that's the way of the Ruach Mizrachit to be very, very hot. And therefore, when it's going to come and blow, it's not going to bring the bad smell to the city. Rabbi Kiva argues that he says, no, Lechol Ruach will say, you can do it anywhere, except for the west of the city. Umarchik 50 amah. And then you have to distance 50 amot. Okay, next part of the Mishnah. You're going to distance the Mishra, which is the flax from the vegetables, or the krishim and bitzalim, or also the krishim, the leeks, and the bitzalim and the onions, that chardal and the mustard, right, from the devorim, from the bees. Rabbi Yosef mati b'chardal, but Rabbi Yosef says that it's going to be mutar for the mustard. Says the Gemara. Yeah, let's try to analyze this Mishnah. So says the Gemara, so they asked Rabbi Akiva, right? They asked Rabbi Akiva, Hechi ka'amar, what exactly is he saying right now? Right? Is the pshat of Rabbi Akiva that any direction he wants, he could do it, except for the west, that you do have to distance 50 amot? Well, Dimar, maybe anywhere he could do it, you distance 50 amot, except for the Ma'arava, except for the west, you don't do it at all. Meaning, we had the words of Rabbi Akiva in the Mishnah. Rabbi Akiva argued on the Tanakama, and Rabbi Akiva comes and he says, no, lechol ruach oseh, except for the west, umarchi 50 amah. These words, marchi 50 amah, is that on everything else other than the west, that you don't do it at all? Or everything else you're allowed to, right? Except for the west, you're not allowed to do it at all. But everything else you have to do to the... Meaning, what's going on? What is the pshat in the words of Rabbi Akiva? So Tashema, we're going to try to bring a proof. The time we learned to the Braita, Rabbi Akiva comes and he says, "Lechol ruach oseh," to any direction he's allowed to do it, except for the west. The eno oseh kolikar, because he doesn't do it at all. Why? Because there's always a western wind, and since there's always a western wind, it's going to come and bring such a bad stench to the city that you can never do it in the west. That's the way that they want to bring a proof. So Elmaleh Rav Nachman says Rav Nachman, my tidira, what do you mean by that? It's tidira. If you're going to tell me that there's always a western wind, the Amar Rav Chanan bar Abba Amar Rav says Rav Chanan bar Abba, name of Rav. There's going to be 4 different winds every single day. The Ruach Tzefonit in Kulan, the northern one, is with all of them. Elmaleh, because if it wasn't for the northern one with all of them, the world would not actually be sustained. The Ruach Turomit Kashem Kulan, and the Ruach Turomit is actually worse than all the other ones. Meaning the southern wind is the worst than all the other ones. And if it wasn't for this malach that is like a net, like an eagle, shema'amida, that stops the wind, it will destroy the world. Which means, if you're going to tell me now, it's going to make this thing, the nets, which is the angel, will come and stop it from the south. But rather, what does it mean, tedira? It doesn't mean with the winds. Tedira means Shechina. It's called the Shechina. The Amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi says, Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, Bo v'nachzik tova lavotenu. Let's look at the Anshe Knesset Gdolah. Sheodiu makom tefillah, that they told us where exactly to do the tefillah. Tichtiv says in Pasuk tzva shamayim lecha mishtachavim, which means the shamesh v'yareach, right? The sun and the moon, which are tzva shamayim, they are always starting bizrichatam in the east, going, and they bow towards the west. So therefore, from there we learn how we're supposed to do it. Meaning, where does the sun rise? Right? In the east. Where is it kilu bowing the entire time? Going towards the west. So that's what. So we have to be machzik tova to Anshe Knesset Gdolah that they taught us the place of tefillah. So matkif la Rav Bar Yaakov. So Rav Bar Yaakov comes and he says, 1 second. The dilma ke'evin notel mipras mirabo vechozel achorav mishtachave. Whoever told you that since the sun is coming up in the east and going to the west, it's bowing down to the west. Maybe it's opposite. Maybe it's coming up and it's walking backwards. When you leave your master, you walk backwards. So for maybe it's coming up in the east, but it's walking backwards towards the west. The kavanah that it's in the east, not in the west. Answers the Gemara, kasha. It's a good question. You're right. It's a bomb question. We don't have an answer. Kasha. Fine. Next. Rav Oshia holds Shekhinah bechol makom. The Shekhinah is in every place. The Amar Rav Oshia, but says Rav Oshia, Madich what is meaning in the pasuk? Ata Shem levadecha, ata asita shvaim 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 utzubam eretz v'choshelem yem yichol shvaim, v'ata b'chei kulam mitzvah shlachavim shluchacha, which means the tzva shemaim is not like shluchei basavadam. Shluchei basavadam, the shliach of a human being, makom shem nishtalachim l'sham achzirim shlichutan. Wherever they go, they have to come back and tell you that they did their shlichut. Aval shluchacha, by your shlichut, the makom shem nishtalachim sham achzirim shlichutan. For the place that they're going to go, that's where meaning wherever they get there, that's where they can tell HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we did your shlichut, right? Wherever it is. Shneimar says, why? Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu is all over the place. That means you don't have to. It's not like you have to come back to tell them that I fulfilled my job. Shneimar says the pasuk, Hatshalach b'rakim v'yelechu v'yimru lecha hinenu yavo v'yomru lo neemar ela v'yelchu v'yomru. Mashma that they said in the same place where they went. Melamed shashchina me'ochol makom. So the shechina is everywhere. Meaning it's not that he has to come back to a certain destination to come and tell them something. Wherever he's going to go, that's where he's able to tell them. The Rabbi Ishmael Savar also the same thing. That means it's not only Rav Oshia. Rabbi Ishmael also holds that Shekhinah bechol makom. He says the Tana of Ishmael, Minay Shekhinah bechol makom, Shneimar, Hinei HaMalach tover bi yotze u'malach acher yotze likrato. Right? It doesn't say yotze acharav lo neemar, ela likrato. He's going out towards him. Meaning somebody just left, and then there's another one that's coming towards him. Not coming behind him, towards him. Meaning they're coming from two completely different directions, and they're both coming from Hashem. So it teaches you the Shekhinah is everywhere. The same thing. Shekhinah bechol makom. The Elmaleh Rav Shesha leshamir says Rav Shesha to his shamash lechol ruchata ukmal b'mizrach. Put him to say Amidah in every direction except for the east. Not because there's no Shekhinah in the east. Obviously there is. The minim, they pray towards the east. So therefore, he doesn't want specifically to the east just because of the minim, but not because there's no Shekhinah. There's Shekhinah everywhere. So he was telling him, place me any direction that you want to pray Amidah except for this. Remember, he was blind. Okay? So he comes and he says, yeah, he says like this. He says, Rabbi Yavu Amar Shekhinah b'ma'arav. Rabbi Yavu is the one that argues, and he says, no. Right? And that means he's going like the first opinion that we said, that really the Shekhinah is in the west. The Amar Rabbi Yavu, my Oriya. What does that mean in the pasuk when it says Oriya? Oriya comes from the word Avid Yah, the Avid of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which means the Shekhinah is in, right, the west. Here it says, because here it says, that's the mashmot of the milah belashon loazit. Orient. Because it's a pasuk. Right? It says like this. Amar Rav Yehuda, what does it mean? Yarov kamata lechi is a ruach ma'aravit sheba me'erpo shel olam. It comes from the back of the world, the nape. Tizal katal minati is the ruach tzfonit, is the northern wind. Shemazelet et hazav, that makes gold cheap. Because basically, since it's going to come and it's going to make it dry, right? It's going to dry the land, so therefore it becomes very, very expensive, the food and everything, and then even the gold becomes cheap because of inflation. Yeah, and that's what it means. Hazalim zahav mikis. Right, mfazrim, right, fuzarim. We're talking about now the mfazrim, right, that it's going to be spread out. Kisirim al deshe is ruach mizrachit shemisaeret. That's why it's kisirim. Et kol haolam kisaid, right? So it's going to make it like a said. Because when the ruach mizrachit comes and it blows, it brings a lot of bad things in the world. The chirvivim al esev is ruach deromit shemaleh revivim. It brings the rain, and therefore it's going to make everything grow. Okay, so again, these are the different attributes of the different things. Yeah, Tanya, we learned in a Braita. Rabbi Eliezer says, "Aolam leachsadra udome." Kafei amud bet. This world is compared to an achsadra. What's an achsadra? Something which has like a, like the roof that's closed off on three sides, but it's open on one. It's like a patio, right? That's closed off on three sides and it's open on one. The ruach tzefonit ena mesubevet, and the ruach tzefonit is not inside of the mechitza. It's a kerem maravit tzefonit. So once the sun comes to the northwestern part, it bends lemana min harakia, and it goes outside of the world. Rabbi Yoshua says העולם לקובה הוא דומה. The world is compared to an ohel, to a tent, right, which is completely closed off. And it is closed off also the northern wind, the northern side. So once it comes to the northeast, northwest, it goes behind the dome, and it starts again. Basically, we're talking about the sun. How does it work? So it's going. All of a sudden, it goes to the northwest, and all of a sudden disappears. And so does it go like above the world, as if to say, or does it go just like behind, right, and starts again? It's going to the south, and then it goes around to the north. It goes to the south during the day, and it goes to the north, right, during the night. Okay. Okay, here we're talking about astronomy a little bit. It says that even though it always comes up in the east and goes in the west, it doesn't go up and down in the same direction of the horizon, right? So if you're going to come and you're going to make like a line, right? So he comes and he says you're going to see that in the summer, the sun goes up, right, and goes down, right, in a certain place, and in the winter it goes up in a southern place, more south, right? Right. So he says Hashemesh doracha v'shukat b'nekudat tzfoni biyoter, right? It's going to be the northernmost part in Tammuz, right, which is going to be the longest day of the year. And Tkuvat Tevet, it's going to be on the southernmost part. You have a picture there on the article, right? You understood or not? Here you have the picture. So over here, you see it if it's going to be in Tkufat Tammuz or Tevet, meaning the person is in the middle. But where's the sun going to come out, from here or from here, right? Or in the middle when it's an equinox, which means that at the end of the day, for sure, it's always coming up in the east and going down in the west. But is it coming up northeast, right? Or is it coming up southeast? Or is it coming up in the center of east? So it all depends on when you are in the time frame of like the period of in which seasons you are. Okay. Okay, fine. Sovev holech haruach, right? Ve'al sivivotav shav haruach. So the ruach of the shemesh, right, is going around. Okay, elu pnei mizrach u'pnei marav, and that's on the east and the west. Sometimes it's going around it, and sometimes it's actually going on it. Fine. So he says, right, that this is actually coming in the shita of Rabbi Eliezer. Okay, fine. The Braita is going to continue. So the Braita says like this. There's a pasuk, and it says it's coming from the room. So mizrach kara is ruach tzefonit, nishmat eliter is ruach maravit, and rochav ma'im nusak is ruach mizrachit. So says the Gemara. 1 second. Ve'amar more. You just told me on Amud Aleph that the ruach dromit is good because it brings rain, and if it brings rain, it grows things. So what are you telling me now that we're talking about the ruach dromit? Is minacheder tavo sufa, and sufa is a se'ara, is like a storm. You told me on Amud Aleph that the southern wind is good, and it's going to bring rain, and it's going to make, and also now you're telling me it's going to bring through storms. What's going on? So it says the Gemara lakashia hadat yamita benichuta habeshvichud. It all depends. Does it bring rain nicely? So then you're right, it's going to make things grow, and it's going to be beracha. Or does it bring it like a shvicha? Shvicha is like mamash, like a sha'ata, like the cats and dogs that is just boom, yeah. Yeah. So Amar Rav Chasta says Rav Chasta, right? My dichti, what does it mean in the pasuk? Mitzafon zahav yeteh, that from the north it's going to make the gold cheap. Ruach tzfoni mazelet et hazav. The ruach tzfoni is going to dry everything up, and then it's going to make the gold cheap because of inflation. So he comes and he says, that's what it means the pasuk. Hazalim zav mikis. Amar Rav Chasta, miyon shachar bet hamikdash lo gshema ruach tormit. It wasn't filled the southern winds, right? שנאמר בספר פסוק ויגזור על ימין ורעב ויאכל על שמאלו ולא שבע וכתיב צפון ימין אתה בראתם. פייט. ואמר רב רמה בפעם רב חסדה, עשרת בפעם רב חסדה, מיום שחר בית המקדש אין הגשמים יורדים מאוצר טוב, שנאמר יפתח השם לך את האוצר הטוב. בזמן שישראל עושה שלום מקום, ישראל שולים על מנתם, גשמים יורדים מאוצר הטוב. Meaning, when Bnei Israel are doing רצונו של מקום and they're on their lands, then the גשמים will come from the אוצר הטוב. But בזמן שאין ישראל שולים על מנתם, and Geshamim Yordim, it's not going to come from the Otzar Tov. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, says Rabbi Yitzchak, another very important Gemara. Harotze shiachim Yadrim, you want to become smart, turn to the south. If you want to become rich, turn to the north. Simanech, shulchan b'tzafon, v'menorah b'darom. The shulchan, which is the table, is going to be in the north, and the menorah is going to be in the south. Right? And that's the way to remember it. Mishom Levi says, Mishom Levi, lo midrom. Yadrim, you should always go towards the south. If you're going to become smart, you're going to become rich as well. Shneimar says the pasuk, orech yamin b'yamina, b'smolah. Osher v'chavod. What does that mean? It's that the Chokhmah, which is the Torah, also has Osher and Kavod. So therefore, he says you should always go towards the south. So ask the Gemara, Rabbi he says you have to go on the Ma'arav. He says no, the mitzvah, which means that you have to be going like a Ruach Deromit, which means it's like the southwest. So for us, it's like the south. We would do the southeast. You understood? That means you're going to be praying a little bit towards 41st Street. Exactly, the right, which is 41st Street, which is the south. Yeah, so it's a little bit inclined. What? For Chokhmah. And then that's also Osher, which comes because of the Chokhmah. Right? Sometimes you have to be. Now, I do remember, right, even though I want you to check to make sure, but if I remember correctly, there might be a problem. Because, for example, let's say I am on this side of the synagogue. So for sure, I could pray towards the south, because I'm praying towards the Hechal. But what happens if the opposite? What happens if I sit on that side of the synagogue, already in the south? If I'm going to be praying inclined to the south, I'm giving my back to the Hechal. I'm praying away from the Hechal. So therefore, there's a whole thing about that it's always better if you're going to do that you should be in the center or towards the left. So that way, when you're inclined, you're always towards the Hechal. You understand? Yeah. So Elmaleh Ravashi says Ravashi Gonatun. For example, you guys in Bavel, that you guys are going to be in the north of Eretz Yisrael. You're obviously going to go to the south. You're going to pray towards the south. And how do we know that Bavel is going to be to the north of Israel? So he says, Dichtiv says the pasuk, Mitzafon tipatah hara'a al kol yoshevei haaretz. This is actually going to be next week's haftarah, not this week, not the Shabbat, next Shabbat. The first Shabbat of the 3 weeks is Divrei Yirmiyahu ben Chilkiyahu, which is also haftarah of Shemot. Right, Parashat Shemot for Sfaradim, and that's also the 3 weeks one of the first one of the 3 weeks, so we have a special tune for it. And there we say Mitzafon tipatah hara'a al kol yoshevei haaretz, which means from the north, it's going to start the bad on the people in the land. What's the north? From Bavel. So for that's how we know that the Bavel is in the north of Israel. Right, it says the 2 dots over there. It says, right, what does that mean? He says the Rabbi Yosef says you permits the mustards. He says, but you could tell him until you're going to tell me distance your mustard from my bees, I could tell you distance your bees from my mustards, because they're coming and they're eating all the flowers. We already learned this before. Okay? Fine. Mishnah. Clear until here? Mishnah, Kafe, Amud Bet. 25b, the Mishnah. Towards the bottom. Marchikim et ha'ilan min habor 25 amas. You're going to distance the tree from the bore 25 amot. Uvecharuv uveshikma. And we're talking about the carob and the sycamore's tree, 50 amot. 50 amot. Bemilmalan, doesn't matter whether it's going to be, it was like on top of a mountain, and the border is on the bottom of a mountain, or beminatzad, or it's going to be on the side. Imabor kadma, if the boar came first, potzetz, you cut the tree, and you have to pay him. If the tree came before the boar, lo yekutz, you don't have to cut it down at all. Safek zekra, you don't know who came first. Lo yekutz, don't cut down the tree. Rabbi Yosef says no. Even if the boar is before the ilan, you don't cut down the tree. Because each one is going to come and he's going to dig within his own, and he's going to plant within his own. So you can do whatever you want, basically. Like each one is going to do whatever they want. You can't force him to come and start cutting down his trees. Okay, fine. Says the Gemara. Tana, we learned in a Braita. Ben shabol lemata v'ilan lemala, ben shabol lemala v'ilan lemata. Doesn't matter whether the border is on the bottom or the tree is on the top, or the border is on the top and the tree is on the bottom, in like let's say of a mountain or whatever it is. Right? So he says you would still have the same halachot. Says when Abishma, I understand if the border is on the bottom and the tree is on the top, because then imagine the roots of the tree are going to come down and they're going to damage the board. Makes sense. But if the border is on the top, what do I care if the tree is on the bottom? The tree's down here. The board is on top of the thing. So even if the board is deep, but the roots of the tree is not going to damage it. So he answers the Gemara, Amar Rav Chaga b'Shem Rabbi Yosef, mipnei shemachlidin et hakarka. They come and they go underneath the ground, umalkin et karkaito shel bor, and it's going to go on the bottom of the bor. Meaning, since it's going to be right on the bottom of the pit, so therefore the pit is on certain depth. But underneath that, the roots are going and it destroys the you know, something like it's going to destroy what's going on over there. Rabbi Yosef says, Afal pisha bor kodem el ilan lo yakutz. Even though the bor is going to be before the ilan, you shouldn't destroy it, right? You shouldn't cut it down. Each one is going to be digging within their own. Amar Rav Yehuda says, Shmuel, halacha Rabbi Yosef, halacha is going to be like Rabbi Yosef. So Amar Ravashi says, Ki avam berav kahana. When we were in the academy of Kahana, we used to say, Modeh Rabbi Yosef, right? That Rabbi Yosef was modeh, that if he's sending his own arrows, that for sure you have to, you have to distance yourself, because if you're doing it, meaning if it's being done on its own, that's one thing. But if it's your arrows that are going and damaging, for sure you are going to be obligated. Papa Yonah, ani ve'shirava. If you know, he was a person, ani, and one day he became an ashir, Papa Yonah. He was called that because he came from Yonah or from Yavna'a, right? Okay. So he says like this. He says, Bana Padna. So he built for himself like a tower. So there were these guys in his things. Then you are hitting, have a naide padne. They would come and it would shape the walls of his palace. So Atalak when the Ravashi came in from Ravashi. Because they were the ones that were making like oil of sesame oil. So therefore, when they were coming and banging, he used to start moving the building. So after the Ravashi, he says, when I was in the academy of Kana, he used to say, that he admits and how much. He says just like the shiur, that if they're going to put the jug right on top of the thing, would it move? Would the cover move because of the moving or not? Meaning that if they're banging, and all of a sudden you have, let's say, this jug, and you have a cover on the jug. If the cover of the jug would fall off the jug, that's already enough in order to stop them from doing their work, because then again, right, they're going against it. Have a wonderful day.